Welcome to the Human Archive. If you enjoy original science fiction stories about humanity finding its place among the stars, subscribe and join us for the next one. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The Impossible Hull. Curator Caden Emher had spent 19 years excavating a ship that refused to admit it existed. He had tried every method permitted by Belith archaeological law: gravimetric mapping, samples from already damaged armor, induced current through exposed conduits, thousands of linguistic patterns across plausible frequencies, and even a military cryptography team working through an exposed communications node. The ship had ignored every attempt. It had not rejected them. Rejection would at least have acknowledged their existence. A defensive machine could warn, a damaged machine could fail, and a dead machine could remain silent. This vessel behaved as though the researchers standing on its skin did not qualify as relevant events. Commander Ashal Lennox arrived on Orison 4C during the 19th year and looked at the exposed hull for less than a minute before saying, "That is a very large problem." Caden turned toward her. The human officer stood beside the excavation platform with her helmet tucked beneath one arm. Behind her waited Dr. Livia Boone, a human archaeogeneticist, and Dr. Conrad Bale, a systems linguist whose expression suggested he had already discovered 3 things he wanted to argue about. Caden disliked all 3 humans on principle rather than personally. Principle was cleaner. The Belith had discovered the vessel, excavated it for decades, and dated the surrounding geology. Humanity had no known historical connection to Orison 4C. Even so, the Coalition Archaeological Council had insisted on a human team because several internal measurements suggested the crew spaces might have been designed for organisms roughly human-sized. Caden considered that weak reasoning and had said so. The council sent humans anyway. Ashal looked over the excavation trench. Nearly 3 kilometers of black hull had already been exposed, yet the vessel continued beneath compacted regolith in both directions. "We still don't know the full length," she asked. Caden answered, "Ground-penetrating scans suggest approximately 5.8 kilometers, though structural overlap beneath the southern ridge makes the estimate uncertain." Ashal whistled softly. Livia glanced at her and called it a professional response. "I'm being professional," Ashal said. "You whistled," Livia said. "I professionally whistled," Ashal replied. Caden's sensory frills tightened. Humans were going to be exhausting. He gestured toward the hull. The vessel was deliberately buried. That ended the humor. Ashal looked at him. "You're sure?" "Very." Caden led them toward the observation gantry. Below, excavation lights washed across ancient armor. Some sections were smooth and nearly pristine beneath the regolith. Others carried long scars where weapons had burned through layers of material no modern laboratory had successfully reproduced. The surrounding deposit was not natural, Caden explained. Material was moved over the vessel after it entered this moon's gravity well. "We found excavation traces beneath the oldest compacted layer." Conrad leaned toward the glass. "So whoever put it here wanted it hidden after it had already been damaged." Caden confirmed both points. Ashal asked how old. Caden had been waiting for that. 100,000 years approximately. Ashal looked from Caden to the ship and back again. "No." Livia closed her eyes while Conrad smiled. Caden said, "That is the usual response." Ashal frowned. "Your dating is wrong. It has been repeated by 7 institutions. Then 7 institutions are wrong." Livia spoke before Caden could. "Ashal." The commander looked at her. Livia continued, "We came here because the dating was independently verified." "I know." "Then stop arguing with geology." Ashal looked back through the glass. 100,000 years. "At minimum," Caden said. "The burial layer is approximately that age. The vessel may be older." The human went quiet. Caden understood why. Every species had historical anchors, periods before which certain achievements simply did not exist. For humanity, 100,000 years ago meant deep prehistory. No known cities, writing, metal industry, or anything remotely like an interstellar warship. Conrad asked, "And you said it isn't dead?" Caden's frills lifted slightly. "I did." "What does that mean?" Caden looked toward the hull. "Dead machines deteriorate." Ashal followed his gaze. Caden continued. "Reactor chambers collapse, insulation becomes brittle. Seals fail, internal structure deforms. Even under ideal conditions, time wins. He touched a control. The display changed to show scans from deep within the buried vessel. The scan showed several internal compartments still pressurized, microscopic current moving through some electrical pathways, and a low-power field persisting around the central archive section. "There are systems inside this ship that continue to function," Cadden said. "They have done so for longer than any known civilization in this region has recorded history." Asha looked at the scans. "Then why won't it answer you?" Cadden considered the question. That was the part he hated most. "We do not know." Conrad leaned closer. "Maybe it isn't waiting for you." Cadden turned. The human linguist shrugged. "You said it yourself, it doesn't act dead." Cadden looked back at the ancient hull. For 19 years, he had resisted putting the thought into official reports because it sounded unscientific. He had allowed himself to think it anyway. "This vessel," he said carefully, "does not appear abandoned." Asha glanced at him. "What does it appear to be?" Cadden stared at the buried warship, waiting. Chapter 2. The door. The first impossible event occurred 6 hours later, and Cadden would spend months being irritated by how ordinary it looked. There were no alarms or dramatic power surges. Commander Asha Lennox simply put her hand on a door. The access point had been exposed 12 years earlier. Belith engineers had designated it Personnel Entry 17 because the original markings remained undeciphered. The 3-meter access door sat flush with the outer armor and showed no visible hinge, mechanical release, or conventional locking mechanism. Cadden had personally supervised 23 attempts to open it. None had succeeded. The humans came to inspect it because Cadden wanted their opinion on the proportions. That was all. Asha stepped onto the access platform. "The controls are here." Cadden indicated a dark panel beside the door. "We believe so." Conrad studied the surface. "No symbols. There were once markings beneath this layer, but they do not respond to optical enhancement." Livia was more interested in the surrounding frame. Livia said the frame was the right height for a human. Cadden reminded her that proportions alone proved nothing. "I didn't say they did," she replied. Asha reached toward the panel. Cadden almost stopped her, then decided there was no harm. Thousands of researchers had touched it. Her fingers rested against the black surface. Nothing happened. Cadden felt an absurd flicker of satisfaction. Then Asha said the panel felt warm. Cadden froze and made her repeat it. When she removed her hand, she explained that the control surface felt warmer than the surrounding hull. "That is impossible," he said. Asha smiled. "Good, I was worried today might get boring." He ignored her. A thermal scanner confirmed that the panel had warmed by less than a degree. The change was small but real. Cadden checked background radiation and electrical flow. Neither showed anything that explained it. Asha reached out again. This time Cadden said, "Wait." She stopped. He called the excavation control room. "Monitor every internal power signature." The answer came back quickly. "All channels open." Cadden looked at Asha. "Touch it again." She did. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then a pale line of light appeared beneath Asha's palm, traced the shape of her fingers and hand, and remained glowing when she jerked back. Livia stepped closer and asked what the panel had done. Cadden checked the scanner and said it appeared to have sampled organic material. Asha looked at her hand. "It sampled me." Cadden did not answer. Deep beneath them, something woke. The excavation platform shivered with a low, steady vibration that Cadden felt through his boots. His communicator erupted with reports of power moving through sections that had been dormant since discovery. Internal fields strengthened and thermal signatures appeared along buried conduits. For 19 years, Cadden had begged the ship for any response. Now the moon itself seemed to hum. Asha stared at Conrad. "You're teaching it English." "I'm giving it structure." She suggested he could start with hello. Conrad replied that he was starting with pronouns. "That is less friendly," Asha said. The panel continued changing. 5 minutes later, recognizable Terran letters began appearing beneath the alien script. The grammar was rough, but the meaning was clear enough. The panel displayed biological line, then changed to lineage match. Cadden stopped breathing. A moment later, the final message appeared, lineage accepted. The door opened slowly. Ancient mechanisms moved somewhere beyond the armor as a seam appeared, followed by a low-pressure hiss. The door withdrew inward and to the side. No air rushed out. A second barrier still sealed the chamber beyond. Cadden looked at Asha. The human commander had gone very still. Cadden told Asha that she had opened a door his teams had failed to move for 12 years. She shook her head. I touched it. It ignored my species for decades. I still only touched it. Cadden stepped closer. The passage beyond the door was dark until lights began switching on one after another, not randomly but in sequence ahead of Asha. Cadden looked at her. She looked back. I don't know either. That sentence would become very familiar. Chapter 3. Built for humans. The first corridor ended the argument, which irritated Cadden. Scientific mysteries were supposed to narrow gradually as evidence accumulated and possibilities disappeared. The interior of the ancient vessel had no interest in proper pacing. The first corridor was not merely similar to human proportions. It was human. The ceiling height fit them. Handrails sat where human hands naturally reached. Emergency grips matched human finger spacing. And a recessed compartment opened for Asha to reveal a breathing mask shaped almost perfectly for a human face. Livia and Cadden stared at it in silence. When Conrad moved toward a control surface, the interface stayed dark until Asha came close, then illuminated and began placing newly learned modern text beneath the unknown symbols. Asha read aloud. Environmental section stable. Primary atmosphere unavailable. Local reserve safe for Terran physiology. Cadden's frills went rigid at one word in the translated display. Terran. Asha nodded. I heard it. That word is human. Conrad answered before the exchange could spiral. The Latin root is ancient by our standards, but not 100,000 years ancient. The ship is using a word it just heard from us. That explanation made sense. It did not help. They continued inward. The passage descended through 2 sealed pressure sections. Several doors remained locked. Others opened for Asha. One corridor had collapsed beneath ancient structural damage and forced them around through a maintenance route. Cadden found that reassuring. The vessel had survived an impossible span of time, but it was not immortal. It was wounded. It had simply refused to finish dying. They found crew quarters with human-sized sleeping recesses, storage compartments containing the dust of long-decayed fabric, and rigid remains shaped like boots. Livia crouched beside one and confirmed that the proportions matched a human foot. Farther inward, they found a galley, sanitation facilities, and what appeared to be a medical bay. Every room sharpened the same conclusion. Asha eventually stopped saying she did not know, not because she understood more, but because the phrase no longer covered the scale of the problem. Cadden stopped beside a skeletal command chair shaped for a human spine and rested one gloved hand on its edge. This ship is at least 100,000 years old, he said. Your species was not spacefaring. As far as you know, you did not have cities or industrial technology. Explain this. Livia looked around the room. I can't. You are an archaeogeneticist. That does not make me a time traveler. Conrad was studying a wall inscription. He had managed to identify repeated patterns but not meanings. Asha stood near the doorway. Cadden looked at all 3 humans. You truly knew nothing about this. Asha answered simply, no. He had spent enough time with humans to recognize deception reasonably well. She looked frightened rather than guilty, which was worse. If humanity had been hiding an ancient interstellar empire, the mystery would at least have had a political explanation. Instead, the people being recognized by the ship looked as confused as everyone else. Asha said, you keep looking at me like I personally misplaced it. Cadden's frills twitched. You are the first organism it has acknowledged in 19 years. Still not my fault, Asha said. Cadden reminded her that her biology had opened the door. I'm aware. Conrad looked up from the wall and cautioned them against assuming that the ship considered modern humanity identical to its builders. Cadden countered with the human-shaped corridors, the fitted breathing mask, and the explicit lineage-accepted message. Conrad conceded that the first 2 proved physical similarity. The lineage message is harder. Livia suddenly raised one hand. Everyone stopped. She was looking toward a sealed door farther down the medical section. What? Livia moved closer. There's cold beyond this. Cadden checked his scanner. She was right. The sealed compartment beyond the medical section was not truly cryogenic, but it had remained cold enough to preserve material far better than the rest of the ship. When Asha approached, the control panel woke and the door opened. Cadden saw the body before anyone spoke. A desiccated human sat against the far wall, partially wrapped in the remains of a pressure suit, head bowed and one hand resting near the chest. Even after 100,000 years, the proportions were unmistakable. 5 fingers, a human skull, human teeth. Livia made a sound that was not fear so much as recognition and walked forward very slowly. The compartment's cold, vacuum, and darkness had preserved enough soft tissue along the arms and neck for molecular analysis. Asha whispered, "Tell me that's convergent evolution." Livia opened her sample kit without answering. Her hands were shaking. Chapter 4. Whoever they were. The first genetic test failed. The second produced contamination. Livia swore at both of them more creatively the second time. The third result made her stop speaking. Cadden stood behind the laboratory partition with Asha while Conrad paced. None of them had slept properly. Livia ran the comparison again, stared at the alignment data, and raised one finger when Asha finally asked for an answer. Another minute passed before Livia sat back. "It's human." Cadden already knew what she meant. He asked anyway, "How human?" Livia turned the display. "Not approximately, not convergent, not a species near yours that happens to resemble you, Homo sapiens." Asha's face went blank and Conrad stopped pacing. Cadden stepped closer and asked whether Livia was certain. "Not absolutely," she said. "The material is degraded, which is why I'm running 3 methods before I tell the galaxy anything. But this is not convergent evolution. It falls well inside Homo sapiens variation." Asha looked at the screen. "How close?" Livia enlarged the comparison. "Close enough that if these remains came from an appropriate layer on Earth, nobody would question the genus. Some markers are unusual and some regions are too damaged for confidence, but this person was human." Cadden's mind rejected the combination. 100,000-year burial layer, a 5-kilometer warship, and a dead Homo sapiens crew member. Reality appeared unconcerned with the contradiction. Asha leaned against the laboratory wall and asked whether an outside civilization could have removed humans from Earth that far back. Conrad warned that this was an enormous historical claim to build from one corpse and one door. Asha pointed toward the excavation below them. "And the 5-kilometer warship." Conrad conceded the point. Cadden asked Livia whether modern humanity might descend from the ancient off-Earth population, or whether that population might instead descend from people who remained on Earth. Livia said either relationship was possible from the degraded evidence, but she could not tell him how it had happened. When Cadden pressed again, her patience ended. "If you ask me one more time, I am going to start inventing answers." He stopped. She looked back at the screen, her voice softened. "But whoever they were." Asha turned. Livia swallowed. "They were us." No one spoke after that. They did not need to. Chapter 5. The bridge. The ship began guiding them the next day without ever announcing that it was doing so. Lights activated farther inward. Some sealed doors unlocked when Asha approached, and other passageways remained closed. Cadden found the restrictions reassuring. Any machine willing to trust a completely unknown human after one genetic scan would have been badly designed. The route led toward the forward third of the ship, through a vast chamber of dead machinery that Conrad and Cadden immediately disagreed about. They argued over its original purpose for 20 minutes while Asha ignored them. Eventually, they reached a pair of armored doors wider than anything they had encountered before. The panel beside them activated. This time it did not display lineage accepted. A vertical beam crossed Asha from head to foot. Cadden's scanner registered low-level electromagnetic activity, while the vessel sampled her blood oxygen, neural activity, skeletal proportions, genetic markers, and probably dozens of other factors they could not identify. Asha waited until the beam disappeared. Then she said, "I'm starting to resent being scanned by dead people." Conrad glanced at the door. "They may not consider themselves dead." "That is less comforting." The doors opened onto an enormous bridge, not because its crew had been enormous, but because the ship had once commanded something enormous. Rows of stations descended toward a central tactical pit. Many were dark, some had collapsed, and one section of ceiling had been pierced by an ancient impact that fused the armor into a black, glassy mass. At the center stood a command pedestal. Asha approached the central command pedestal with Cadden a few steps behind her. Symbols moved across its surface, and then the ship spoke through the bridge itself in a low, calm, synthetic voice. Its English was awkward but understandable. Terran continuity lineage confirmed. Nobody moved. Asha stared at the pedestal. "What is Terran continuity?" The ship paused. Historical archive access restricted pending authority validation. Asha looked at Cadden. He almost laughed. Even after 100,000 years, bureaucracy survived. Asha asked who still possessed authority. Unbroken Oath reported that no recognized command officers were present. Conrad asked what had happened to them, but the ship refused to answer. It also denied Asha's request for the identity of its last commander until authority validation was complete. Of course, Asha muttered. Cadden studied the active displays. The ship was not refusing them randomly. It was still protecting information according to a command hierarchy whose officers had been dead for geological ages. Asha asked, "What authority do I have?" The answer came immediately. Verified Earthline descendant, civilizational continuity status under review. Cadden's frills lifted at the phrase civilizational continuity status under review. Asha glanced at him. Apparently humanity has paperwork. Then Unbroken Oath announced that an emergency inheritance protocol was available. Asha's humor disappeared. What does that mean? The bridge lights brightened slightly. The voice answered. If original command structure is terminated, lost, or unreachable, temporary command authority may transfer to validated Earthline descendants who satisfy continuity conditions. Cadden stopped breathing. Conrad whispered, "They planned for this." Asha looked toward the dark stations surrounding them and asked how long the ship had expected to wait. Unbroken Oath refused the historical context, but allowed the chronology. When Asha asked for the interval since its last authenticated human command, it reported approximately 99,812 Terran years, with some uncertainty from accumulated chronometer drift. Cadden gripped the edge of a dead console. The vessel had been waiting longer than recorded human civilization. Asha asked, "What was your last order?" "Maintain concealment, preserve Archive 7, await validated Earthline command." Neither Cadden nor the humans recognized the name Fleet Admiral Yoni Beckett or the Continuity Fleet. Asha made that explicit, telling the ship that modern humanity had no record of either. Then she asked the question that mattered more. "Do you understand that modern humanity does not know who built you?" The ship paused before answering that modern humanity's ignorance was consistent with Continuity Condition 3. It refused to explain the condition until authority inheritance was complete. Asha laughed once without amusement. "Fine, how do I inherit authority?" "State acceptance of emergency, command responsibility." Her expression changed. Cadden saw caution, fear, and professional calculation arrive together. "If I do this, what exactly am I commanding?" Cadden almost replied, then realized she was asking the ship. The ancient voice answered. "Human strategic ship Unbroken Oath, Continuity Fleet Vessel, Archive 7 Custodian, combat status degraded, strategic weapons unavailable, defensive and limited interdiction capability remains." Asha immediately tested the boundaries of that authority. She asked whether accepting command would restart military operations or cause the ship to identify enemies on its own. Unbroken Oath answered no to both questions and stated that it would use autonomous defense only against a direct lethal threat. Asha breathed out. Then she placed one hand on the command pedestal. "I accept emergency command responsibility." For several seconds the ship said nothing. Then bridge lights brightened and dormant displays came alive across the chamber. "Emergency command inheritance accepted. Commander Asha Lennox, temporary commanding authority recognized." Every eye on the bridge turned toward her. Asha looked at the tactical systems waking around them and gave her first order to a warship that had been waiting since before human cities existed. "Do not fire on anyone." "Order accepted." Conrad laughed while Livia covered her face. Cadden decided that if ancient human history did not kill him, modern humans probably would. Chapter 6. Earth was supposed to stay dark. Authority changed everything, but not all at once. Unbroken Oath did not simply unlock its archives. The ship had spent nearly 100,000 years preserving itself by sacrificing parts of itself. Entire data banks were gone, some systems had been cannibalized for repair material, and other archive sectors were so corrupted that Conrad called them historical confetti. Even so, enough information survived to become dangerous. The first complete recording lasted 3 minutes. Cadden watched it with the humans inside a restored briefing chamber. The projection flickered through static and resolved into a middle-aged human woman with dark hair cut close on one side beneath a blood-stained head bandage. Behind her, the ancient bridge burned. Asha went still. This was no abstract ancestral population. It was a person. Conrad had reconstructed enough of the old language for Unbroken Oath to translate the recording into modern Terran speech as it played. The woman looked directly into the recorder. Fleet Admiral Yoni Beckett, Continuity Command. Final authority statement for Unbroken Oath. Primary fleet is lost. Earthline concealment remains viable. Archive 7 is intact. Something exploded behind her. The recording shook. Yoni did not turn. Enemy reconnaissance has crossed the Kepri boundary. All surviving continuity assets are to execute dispersal protocol. Conrad paused the playback at the unfamiliar term Kepri, but Asha told him to save the question for later. He resumed the recording, and Yoni's face tightened. Earth is to remain dark until the cradle can reach the stars without us. Nobody moved. The ancient admiral continued. No transmission is to identify Saul. No rescue attempt is authorized. No contact with the cradle population is permitted while pursuit remains possible. Cadden looked at Livia. Her face had gone pale. The recording continued. If Earth survives, they must survive independently. If they return to the stars under their own power, continuity inheritance may proceed. Yoni looked away briefly, and for the first time grief broke through her composure. When she faced the recorder again, she began, "To whoever hears this next." Static consumed most of what followed. The ship recovered only 2 fragments. "We were human," and several seconds later, "Tell Earth." Then the image failed and did not return. Asha stared at the empty projection and asked whether that was all the file contained. Conrad confirmed it was. Cadden looked toward the black screen. Earth was deliberately hidden. Livia nodded. That was the one point the recording had made unmistakable, although none of them knew from whom. Cadden added that humanity had apparently already been living elsewhere while Earth itself remained technologically primitive. Conrad opened another damaged archive fragment containing migration records. The file was incomplete, but one identity term survived often enough for the ship to translate it. First, diaspora, meaning the oldest off-Earth human population rather than humanity's modern wave of colonization. Asha frowned. "We have no archaeological evidence of this on Earth." Livia stared at the records, maybe because they didn't leave from a technological Earth. Cadden looked at her. "What do you mean?" She pulled up the genetic chronology. "These people are Homo sapiens, but their demographic patterns are strange. There are bottlenecks that don't match known Earth populations. Founder effects." Conrad studied the founder effect data for several seconds before speaking. This could mean a population was removed from Earth very early. Cadden followed the logic reluctantly. The genetics suggested a founder population had been separated from known Earth populations while Homo sapiens were still technologically primitive. What happened after that was hidden behind 100,000 years of missing history. Conrad said, "They may have been taken." Livia nodded slowly. "That is the cleanest hypothesis from what we have. It is not proof." Asha looked toward the kilometers of warship surrounding them. "Taken by whom?" "We don't know," Livia said. "And we don't know whether they were taken as prisoners, colonists, specimens, refugees, or something we do not have a word for yet." Cadden looked toward the darkened wall where Yoni had appeared. Whatever the beginning had been, an off-Earth human population had survived long enough to become interstellar, fight a war, and deliberately hide Earth from whatever was pursuing them. Asha said quietly, "So the part we know is that they were human." Livia nodded. "The rest is a series of very dangerous questions." Cadden added, "And something destroyed their fleet." Silence followed. The ancient ship interrupted. "Correction." Everyone turned. Asha asked, "Correction to what?" "Phrase nearly destroyed, lacks adequate confidence." Cadden's frills tightened. "What would be more accurate?" The ship answered, "Continuity fleet status after final engagement, catastrophic loss. First diaspora civilizational status, unknown." Asha looked at Cadden. "That is somehow worse." He agreed. Chapter 7. The Signal. Something from the old war found them on the 12th day. At first, Cadden thought it was an excavation fault. An ancient sensor beneath the southern ridge activated without command, and then something deeper in the moon began transmitting on a narrow, highly compressed directional signal. A second transmission immediately started moving toward the edge of the system. HFY was on the bridge when the ancient warship reacted. "Warning," Unbroken Oath announced. "Legacy hostile reconnaissance node active." Cadden froze as HFY stepped toward the command pedestal. "Where?" A tactical display opened with a point beneath the moon's northern hemisphere. Conrad stared at it. "That's inside the regolith." Cadden's pulse spiked. "We never detected it." The ship answered. Node employed passive masking architecture consistent with Harvest reconnaissance systems. HFY looked toward the display. "Harvest." The ship hesitated. "Historical designation incomplete. Archive corruption prevents full translation." Then the buried object moved. The moon shuddered as a section of regolith exploded outward and something black and narrow launched from beneath the surface. The craft was smaller than a cruiser and moving far too fast for anything Cadden expected to find under a moon. Alarms sounded across the excavation station as Coalition patrol ships began tracking it. One patrol ship issued an interception warning. The ancient craft ignored it. Then Unbroken Oath spoke. "Hostile node has initiated transmission." HFY's face changed. "What is it transmitting?" The ancient warship translated. "Earthline survival confirmed, interstellar development achieved, continuity asset active." The bridge went silent. Conrad was the first to say it aloud. "It's reporting us." HFY asked who would receive the report. Unbroken Oath could not identify the destination, but warned that once the probe escaped the system, it could transmit beyond reliable interception. HFY turned toward the main tactical display. Modern patrol ships were moving to intercept. The first Coalition destroyer accelerated toward the probe. It never got close. The ancient machine altered vector with violence no modern crewed vessel could tolerate. Its drive signature bent local space. The destroyer's targeting solution collapsed. A second ship attempted to box it toward the moon. The probe simply changed direction again. Cadden watched the range increase. HFY asked how long they had before the probe reached a reliable relay position. "At present acceleration, approximately 7 minutes, Unbroken Oath replied. Cadden understood immediately. Activating Unbroken Oath had awakened something else from the same war, something that recognized Earthline survival and had been waiting long enough to report it. Cadden said, "Stop it." HFY kept her eyes on the probe. "That's the plan." She asked Unbroken Oath whether it could actually intercept the machine. The ship first repeated that limited combat capability remained. HFY's voice hardened. "That wasn't what I asked." This time the answer was immediate. "Yes." HFY put both hands on the command pedestal. "Then stop that probe from transmitting or leaving this system. Do not engage any other vessel unless necessary to complete that order." Order accepted. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Orison 4C broke open. Chapter 8. The Warship Answers. The excavation crews had exposed less than half the hull. Unbroken Oath removed the rest itself. Ancient structural charges fractured the compacted regolith around the buried ship without striking the excavation station. Kilometers of stone split and dust erupted into orbit as the warship forced itself free. It was not graceful. The vessel was too damaged for that. One buried armor section tore away, and a broken dorsal structure disintegrated against the excavation trench while warnings spread across the bridge. Then the drives ignited. Cadden had studied propulsion for most of his life and still could not fully explain what he saw. Thrust, field distortion, and gravitational effects appeared together at energy levels that should not have produced them. The ancient ship was not invincible. Power fluctuated and several drive sections failed to answer, so surviving systems redirected energy through whatever channels remained. Cadden felt acceleration press him into the command rail. The internal gravity field stabilized a moment later. HFY gripped the pedestal and asked whether Unbroken Oath could keep both the excavation station and the Coalition ship safe during launch. The warship confirmed that its current maneuver avoided collision with all of them. The probe was already far ahead and the modern patrol vessels had fallen behind, but Unbroken Oath kept accelerating. The tactical distance closed slowly at first, then faster, until the probe detected the pursuit and changed vector. Unbroken Oath predicted the probe's next vector before the maneuver finished. When HFY asked how, The ship explained that harvest reconnaissance nodes of that class favored escape over engagement and optimized their turns around relay geometry. Asha looked at the display. "You fought these before?" "Yes." Cadden looked at the commander. Asha did not have time to react. The probe shifted again. Only one internal cradle moved. A small, dark vehicle emerged from a launch bay that had been sealed beneath regolith for 100,000 years. Cadden leaned toward the display. "What is that?" "Interdiction vehicle." The weapon accelerated toward empty space rather than the probe. Asha frowned. "Why there?" "Intercept geometry." The probe continued toward the system boundary. When the interdiction vehicle reached its destination, space itself seemed to deform on Cadden's tactical display. Distances fluctuated, the probe's drive signature collapsed, and for an instant the machine appeared in two positions before slamming back into ordinary velocity with no acceleration left. Conrad stared. It disrupted the transit field. Unbroken Oath was already firing. There was no beam or theatrical flare, only a kinetic projectile moving so fast that Cadden's instruments struggled to resolve it. The probe attempted to maneuver, but it was too late. The projectile struck through its central hull, broke the ancient machine apart, and scattered fragments across space. The transmission stopped. Silence filled the bridge. Cadden stared at the wreckage. Modern coalition ships were still thousands of kilometers behind. Asha's hands remained on the command pedestal. Asha checked the tactical display and asked whether any transmission remained active. Unbroken Oath reported none. She asked about additional hostile nodes. The ship found none. Only then did Asha breathe out, "Cease pursuit." "Order accepted." The ancient warship reduced acceleration. Cadden looked around the bridge. Displays remained active, systems hummed, and the floor vibrated faintly beneath his feet. For 19 years, Cadden had treated the vessel as a relic, something to measure, classify, date, and write reports about. Now the relic was flying under orders. Asha looked toward him. "You all right?" Cadden turned slowly. "No." She nodded, "Same." He looked back at the probe's debris. "That ship waited 100,000 years, and the first combat order you gave it was obeyed without hesitation." Asha's expression tightened. It was a pretty reasonable order. Cadden looked at Unbroken Oath's tactical systems, still tracking every vessel in the region. The title in his excavation report had suddenly become inadequate. Unidentified ancient vessel. He would have to change it. Chapter 9. Archive 7. Most of the destroyed probe's fragments were useless, but one section preserved part of its transmission architecture. Conrad spent 4 days reconstructing the signal header and found a network recognition string rather than a destination or coordinate. The same damaged symbol appeared in 3 Unbroken Oath archive fragments. The ship translated the best approximation as Harvest Fleet. Asha disliked it immediately. "So that's who the first diaspora fought." The ship answered, "Association probable. Complete confirmation unavailable." Cadden appreciated the caution. Ancient or not, the machine understood uncertainty. Conrad looked toward Asha. The probe was still following instructions after 100,000 years. Cadden's frills tightened. Nobody needed to say the next thought. If one probe survived, others might have. Asha asked whether the Harvest Fleet still existed. Unbroken Oath said it did not know. Its most recent confirmed intelligence was approximately 99,800 years old. Asha rubbed her forehead. "Useful." The ship interpreted the word literally. "Historical intelligence confidence is low." Conrad smiled despite himself. Cadden did not. Cadden was looking at the archive map. Now that Asha held inherited command, Unbroken Oath had released a partial index showing that Archive 7 held far more than military records. Genetic libraries, migration logs, navigation data, colonial census fragments, evacuation lists, and maps. Some sectors were destroyed and others survived, but the numbering was the part that stopped everyone. Conrad pointed at the index. There were 12 confirmed continuity archives. Asha stepped closer. "Do we have locations?" "Most are corrupted," Conrad said. Then he enlarged one surviving coordinate set. "One is." Cadden recognized the stellar reference immediately. Saul, Asha stared at him. "Which archive?" Conrad swallowed. "Archive 1. Livia leaned over the display. "Where?" Conrad corrected the coordinate for stellar drift. It pointed far beyond Earth, Mars, and the major gas giants, toward a small frozen body in the outer Sol system that modern surveys listed as nothing more than ice and rock. Asha looked at Unbroken Oath. Why is Archive 1 in Sol? Restricted historical context unavailable. Of course. Cadden studied the coordinate. Modern humanity had spent centuries building stations, mining asteroids, and mapping its own system. Somewhere in that familiar dark, an artifact from a forgotten human civilization might have been waiting the entire time. Livia asked, if the archive is there, why didn't it wake when humans reached space? The ship answered before Asha could. Continuity inheritance required independent interstellar achievement. Everyone turned. Asha stepped toward the pedestal. Explain. The ship projected a sequence of authorization conditions. Cadden understood only part of the authorization sequence. It required biological continuity, verified Earth origin, independent technological development, and proof that modern humanity had reached interstellar capability without first diaspora assistance or inherited propulsion technology. Conrad went still. They built a test. Livia looked at him. For what? For us. Asha's expression hardened. She addressed the ship. Asha asked what would have happened if a human had found the ship 10,000 years earlier. Unbroken Oath said biological descendants would have been allowed access to protected shelter functions, but command authority would have been denied. She then asked about a humanity that reached the ship using technology recovered from another continuity site. The answer was equally strict. Full inheritance would remain locked until independent capability was verified. Asha asked one last question. And now? The ship answered, continuity condition satisfied. Asha stared at the coordinate for Archive 1. Then she said, we're going home. Epilogue. Archive 1. 3 months later, Cadden stood on the bridge of a modern Terran exploration cruiser at the edge of the Sol system. He had never expected to see humanity's home star. He had certainly never expected to arrive while escorting a 100,000-year-old human warship. Unbroken Oath remained several thousand kilometers away. Its damaged black hull moved through the dark under its own power. Modern Terran ships surrounded it at respectful distance. No one called it a wreck anymore. Ahead lay the object listed in the ancient coordinates, a frozen dwarf body with no atmosphere and no permanent settlement. Human survey craft had mapped it twice in the previous century. Neither survey found anything unusual. Asha sat in the command chair beside the navigation display. Livia stood behind her. Conrad was already muttering about subsurface scan resolution. Cadden watched the first deep penetration pulse cross the frozen body and return nothing. Conrad adjusted the frequency and sent a second pulse down. This time straight lines appeared beneath the ice, then angles, then geometric chambers extending for kilometers below the surface. Asha leaned forward. Tell me that's geological. Conrad smiled without humor. No. The bridge went quiet until the communications officer reported a signal. Asha asked whether it came from Unbroken Oath. No, the officer said, visibly pale. It's coming from beneath the ice. Cadden felt his sensory frills rise. The signal was weak and ancient. At first it consisted only of tones, but then it began listening to the Terran bridge channels and changing its patterns in response. Language assembled itself. A synthetic voice emerged through the speakers, calm and patient. Earthline descendants confirmed. Asha gripped the arm of her chair. Cadden looked toward the frozen world. Deep beneath the ice, power signatures began appearing one after another. The ancient voice continued. Archive 1 has been waiting.